Today, we're going to do an educational podcast on one of the most important topics in counterterrorism efforts, a global organization called Financial Action Task Force. So, money is the oxygen or lifeblood of terrorism. If there is no money, terrorist organizations' financial resources are choked and organized terrorism dies, though some individual act of terrorism may pop up here and there.
Following the money is the solid counter-terrorist measure. The flow of money can help to identify the donors, middle persons, and even recipient terrorist cells and their members. As lack of money puts terrorist groups out of business, terrorist needs operate training facilities, weapons, travel, professional terrorists all need substantial financial resources.
Yes, so today we're going to talk about financing terrorism and how an organization called Financial Action Task Force is helping in the counterterrorism on a global level.
Alright, so the first question that we're going to start off is what are the most common funding sources for terrorism?
Yeah, so there are four most common funding sources, and the first one would be state sponsors provide financial support. Such support can be indirect in that sponsored governments provide living quarters, training camps, weapons, and so on free of charge. And it can be direct in the terrorist group receives cash payments or can draw from legally established and funded bank accounts. There are many examples of this kind of support. For example, Iran's sponsorship of Hezbollah.
So the second form of funding will be private organization or individuals provide donations. The stronger the sentiments in favor of terrorist groups, motives, and goals, the greater is the likelihood of organizations collecting many small donations for and wealthy individuals donating significant sums to terrorist groups. The Palestinian Hamas, for example, provides educational opportunities, healthcare, and other social services while its military branch commits acts of terrorism. The Lebanese Hezbollah has carried out terrorist acts while participating in legitimate political processes.
Terrorists use their own legitimate business to fund violent acts. This is by far the least likely way to finance terrorism, and the most obvious example is Al Qaeda. The organization was originally funded by Osama bin Laden's inheritance and by the profits of the commercial enterprises he established in Sudan. Um, of course, many hate groups that overtly or covertly encourage political violence rake in profits by selling books, t-shirts, posters, CDs, and other items, most often through like their online stores.
Terrorists get involved in criminal activities to finance their operations. Typically, past and contemporary terrorists have committed bank robberies, pulled off kidnappings to extort ransom money, and engaged in profitable drug trafficking. Smuggling drugs has been a particularly popular source of funding for terrorist groups like TTP, and etc. Okay, so we discussed the general overview of like their funding. So let's move on to the second question. So people say money laundering helps in terror financing. So what is money laundering, and if you can explain a little bit?
Yeah, so money laundering aids in terror financing. It's important to understand this term. The goal of a large number of criminal acts is to generate a profit for the individual or group that carries out the act. Money laundering is the processing of these criminal proceeds to disguise their legal origin of monies. This process of critical importance as it enables the criminal to enjoy these profits without jeopardizing their source, such as illegal arms sales, smuggling, the activities of organized crime, including, for example, drug trafficking, prostitution rings, which can generate a huge amount of monies.
All right, so when a criminal activity generates substantial profits, the individual or group involved must find a way to control the funds without attracting attention to the underlying activity or the people involved. Criminals do this by disguising the sources, changing the form, or moving the funds to a place where they are less likely to attract attention. This money is used mostly for terror financing, as it is difficult to trace it. One report estimates that in 2009, criminal proceeds amounted to 3.6% of global GDP, with 2.6 percent or 1.6 trillion dollars being laundered. You can imagine how it must be to double or more now. If the government and organizations can track it, they can find the source, block transaction, and choke out the terrorist organization. Uh, so moving on, question three. So what are the major parties like the USA, EU, and other international organizations have done to stop the financing of terrorism?
Well, in response to mounting concern over terror financing through money laundering, the Financial Task Force on Money Laundering was established by the G7 summit that was held in Paris 1989. The FATF is the Global Money Laundering and Terror financing watchdog. This intergovernmental body sets the international standard that aim to prevent these illegal activities and the harm they cause to society. As a policy-making body, the FATF works to generate the necessary quote-unquote political will to bring about national, legislative, and reforms in these areas.
With more than 200 countries and jurisdictions committed to implementing them. The objectives of the FATF are set to standards and promote effective implementation of legal, regulatory, and operational measures for combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other related threats to the integrity of the international financial system. Starting with its own members, the FATF monitors the country's progresses in implementing the FATF recommendations, reviews money laundering and terrorist financing techniques and countermeasures, and also promotes the adaptation and implementation of the FATF recommendations globally.
So let me follow up with this question. How do they do it?
Okay, so the FATF reviews money laundering and terrorist financing techniques and continuously strengthens its standards to address new risks such as regulation of its virtual assets which have spread as cryptocurrency gain popularity. The FATF monitors countries to ensure that they implement the FATF standards fully and effectively and holds countries to account when they don't.
Combating terrorist financing is top priority for the FATF, and a key part of the FATF objective is strengthening financial sector integrity and contributing to safety and security.
Um,
Question 4. How many countries are under FATF?
so basically, the 39 members of the FATF currently comprises 37 member jurisdictions and two regional organizations representing major financial centers in all parts of the globe. Next question 5. What are the main tasks of the FATF?
Okay, so there are 5 main tasks of FATF to help stopping terror financing. Criminalize money laundering and enable authorities to confiscate the proceeds of money laundering, implement customer due diligence, example giving identity verification, and record keeping and suspicious transactions, reporting requirements for financial institutions and designated non-financial businesses and professions. The third one.
So third one, establish a financial intelligence unit in the FATF to receive and disseminate suspicious transaction reports and basically cooperate internationally investigating and prosecuting money laundering.
So I have another question. We hear a lot about FATF recommendations or standards. What is that?
Um, there are 40 recommendations on money laundering of the 1990, which are the primary policies issued by the FATF, and the 9 special recommendations on terrorism financing. The recommendations are seen globally as the world standard in anti-money laundering, as well as many countries have made a commitment to put the 40 recommendations in place. In 2001, the development of standards in the fight against terrorist financing was added to the mission of the FATF.
In October 2004, the FATF published a 9 special recommendation further strengthening the agreed international standards for combating money laundering and terrorist financing, the 40 plus 9 recommendations.
In February 2012, the FATF completed a thorough review of its standards and published the revised FATF recommendations. This revision is intended to strengthen the global safeguards and further protect the integrity of the financial system by providing governments with stronger tools to take on action against financial crime.
So, what about the virtual assets like crypto?
The FATF has issued global binding standards to prevent the misuse of virtual assets for money laundering and terrorist financing.
Yeah, and the standards ensure that virtual assets are treated fairly, applying the same safeguards as the financial sector. So, yeah, next question. We see in the news that FATF had published DA, gray list, blacklist. What is that framework?
It's a simple framework. The FATF follows strict criteria to identify potential threats, black or gray listing of non-complaint nations.
So, gray list, countries that fall under the gray list are those that require increased monitoring as they actively work with the body to ensure that they counter money laundering and address the other deficiencies in their regime.
So the blacklist, well, while the FATF gray list includes the countries that are subject to increased monitoring as a result of their deficiencies, the blacklist includes those countries that the FATF has deemed to have significant strategic deficiencies in their monitoring regimes. Um, so this leads to the question of what happens if you are blacklisted.
The consequences of being blacklisted are huge. The credit providers will reject your loan application. In addition, being blacklisted negatively affects your country credit score, which might prevent you from getting any future credit.
So who are all on the blacklist?
As of November 2022, only three countries were on the FATF blacklist: North Korea, Iran, and Myanmar.
Okay. Next question: what are the FATF sanctions on any country?
FATF blacklists identify countries that are considered inadequate in money laundering and counter financing of terrorist regimes. At present, there are only three countries on it.
The FATF calls all members of its countries identified as high risk and encourages all jurisdictions to take due care. Essentially, you are blocked, isolated, and no one can do business with you.
It,
So next question is basically, is the FATF initiative successful?
the FATF initiative is highly effective in shifting laws and regulations to combat illicit financial flows. FATF incentives and stricter regulations through its public non-complier list, gray list, blacklist, which leads financial institutions to shift resources and services away from the countries on the blacklist.
This, in turn, motivates domestic economic and political actors in the listed countries to pressure the governments to introduce regulations that are compliant with the FATF. Um,
So, is there any country which was put on FATF list and removed?
One would be Pakistan was put on the gray list in 2018. The Financial Action Task Force has decided to, by consensus, that Pakistan has completed all substantial technical and procedural requirements of both 2018 and 2021 action plans. As a result, Pakistan has been taken out of the list of jurisdiction under increased monitoring with immediate effect. Pakistan has removed from the list after 4 years.
So, lastly, who can I contact if I suspect a case of money laundering?
Well, the FATF is a policy-making body and has no investigative authority. In respect to investigating a company and persons involved in money laundering, individuals need to contact the local investigative authorities. In case of USA, you can contact local authorities who will help.
So, yeah, pretty much all countries need to make collective efforts to combat terrorism, and the best way to do it is to counter the ideology and block the finances. With that note, me and Anis thank you for listening, and yeah, that's it.